To me, privilege lies in the same space as access and opportunity. We've all heard the phrases, if you don't compete, you can't win, and it's a privilege just to be nominated. Privilege doesn't guarantee an outcome. It allows you to play the game in the first place. Thinness is the outcome of the decisions I've made coupled with the privileges that I have. But if you hold the same privileges as I do to fairly play this game called life, then no, I do not have any privilege over you. Yo-yo and hello, my name is Lydia, and on today's episode of my 25-pound yo-yo, we will be talking about privilege, and if earned privilege is something that needs to be acknowledged. Let's start with the definition of privilege. Privilege is a right or benefit that is given to some people, but not others. It can manifest as a special opportunity or advantage that an individual has over another person or group. For example, the older students had the privilege of going off school property at lunch, whereas the younger students had to stay in the school. Nowadays, there's a lot of conversation around privilege and why we need to acknowledge the privileges that we have because, well, everyone has some privileges. The purpose of acknowledgement is to identify where systemic discriminations exist and search for ways to equalize power. For example, if people of color are treated more harshly by law enforcement than white people that commit the same offenses, we can say that white privilege exists in the legal system and we should try to change the system so that every human is measured by the same standards. Now, where I have an issue is when privilege is earned. The situations where the privilege was the result of a conscious decision or hard work. Privileges regarding race, gender, sexual orientation, creed, etc. are privileges that people fell into. But when people work to acquire a privilege, why does that need to be acknowledged? When a teacher says, finish your work in class and you get the privilege of no homework tonight, the studious pupil earns their privilege of free time. So why should they have to acknowledge it? By acknowledging their privilege, they would have to seek for ways to level the playing field. And that would mean for those who did not do their work during class have free time as well. But that doesn't seem fair now, does it? Now, I know that not all earned privileges are cut and dry. I may have earned my degree, but I was also fortunate enough to be born into a middle-class family that could afford to send me to university. But what about when the playing field is equal from the get-go? And the privilege is the benefit of a good decision, and the lack of privilege is the consequence of a bad decision. The main privilege I want to discuss is thin privilege. But on the way there, I'd like to show a few other examples to better illustrate my point. Some privileges are gifted and some are earned. But which ones, if any, should be acknowledged? In my opinion, earned privileges aren't privileges at all. They're simply choices. And I don't see thin privilege as anything more than the earned benefit of the choice to self-care. So let's watch this next clip about privilege, and then we'll come back and discuss. Do earned privileges need to be acknowledged? Three friends go out for ice cream. Sam has no dairy allergies, but both Dave and Tom are lactose intolerant. Sam eats an ice cream of his favorite flavor. Dave likes ice cream, but he orders a sorbet instead because he doesn't want to feel sick. Tom doesn't care if he gets sick. He has ice cream anyways. Afterwards, Sam and Dave feel fine, but Tom, well, he has a stomachache. Mary, Aaron, and Sarah all run a race. Mary and Aaron registered for the race 4 months ago, whereas Sarah only found out about it a week ago. Mary trains hard for the race. Aaron knows she should train, but chooses not to. And Sarah, well, she didn't know there was a race at all, so she didn't have the opportunity to train. In the end, Mary won the race, Sarah placed 3rd, and Aaron was a distant 25th. Both Mary and Sarah earned prizes, whereas Aaron won nothing. Jeff, Tracy, and Paul are all applying to university. Tracy studies hard because she needs a scholarship to afford school. Jeff doesn't need a scholarship, but he still studies because he wants to ensure he is accepted. And Paul, well, he knows he should study, but chooses not to. In the end, both Jeff and Tracy get into school, but Paul does not. Tracy's grades are even good enough to get her a scholarship. 3 colleagues go out to a bar. Kira and Annabelle both have work the next day, but Robert does not. Kira decides to call it a night because she knows she has an early morning the next day. But Robert and Annabelle, they both decide to stay, even though Annabelle knows it will make for a rough morning. The next day, Kira is feeling fine at work. Robert is at home sleeping. And Annabelle, well, she has a terrible hangover that she needs to battle through. Tess, Jillian, and Autumn are all friends that enjoy going out and doing things together. Autumn is effortlessly thin. She doesn't over or undereat and exercises naturally because it makes her feel good. Jillian is also thin, but not effortlessly so. She watches what she eats and makes sure to exercise 5 days a week. Tess has no desire to eat well or exercise. When they go shopping, Autumn and Jillian can easily find clothes that fit and look nice on them, whereas Tess has limited selection and some stores don't even carry her size. So, what was the point of all of this? Well, it was to show how any earned advantage can be seen as a privilege, and that by acknowledging a privilege, it dilutes or even disqualifies the work that went into earning it. If everyone got the same privileges, regardless of their bad choices, well then what is the incentive of making good choices? This everybody wins inclusivity is breeding a new generation of lazy, entitled people. So let's revisit each of the scenarios in the clip and discuss who has privilege and why it should or should not be acknowledged. In scenario 1, Sam has privilege over both Tom and Dave, since he does not have a dairy allergy. Sam can acknowledge his privilege by writing to the ice cream manufacturers about offering more dairy-free alternatives. But does Dave have privilege over Tom because he feels good and Tom feels sick? I say no, because Tom made a choice to eat that ice cream knowing full well he'd feel ill after, and Dave did not. In scenario 2, Mary and Aaron both have privilege over Sarah since they knew about the race earlier than she did. They can acknowledge their privilege by asking the race coordinators to do more advertising next year, which will give more people the chance to plan for their event. But both Mary and Sarah won prizes and Aaron didn't. Sarah won a prize due to the privilege of her natural athleticism, whereas Mary earned her privilege by training for the race. Aaron could have trained, but she chose not to. If Mary and Sarah acknowledge their privilege of receiving prizes, does that mean that Aaron should receive a prize too? I say no, because Aaron had every opportunity to train but chose not to. And even if she did train and still finish 25th, well, that is life. That would be like giving everybody in the Olympics a gold medal just for getting there. Life is full of rewards at the intersection of hard work and skill. We can't all be good at everything. That's what makes us unique and what makes life, well, life. In scenario 3, Jeff and Tracy earned the privilege of receiving a post-secondary education, but Paul did not. Jeff has socioeconomic privilege that he could acknowledge by petitioning the school to offer more scholarships. But do Jeff and Tracy have privilege over Paul? Paul didn't get accepted because he chose not to study. If we give him the same privilege, that means that all people should have the right to post-secondary education regardless of their grades. And that doesn't seem fair to those that earn their spots. Paul made his choice, and not going to university is his consequence. In scenario 4, Robert had the privilege of not having work the next day. But both Kira and Annabelle did have to work. Kira made the choice to go home early, so she earned her privilege of not feeling tired or sick the next morning. Annabelle is suffering the consequence of being hungover and having to work because she chose to stay out late. If we were to try to level the playing field, well, what could we do? Have the bar only serve non-alcoholic beverages? Or maybe close early so that nobody stays out late? Or maybe Annabelle should get to go home and sleep like Robert. I think that any measure taken to appease Annabelle would make her less accountable for her own actions. And lastly, we get to scenario 5. Autumn has privilege over Jillian and Tess, since eating right and exercising regularly comes naturally to her. She isn't naturally thin despite her lifestyle. She naturally wants to lead a healthy lifestyle. She doesn't need to put extra effort into doing the right things because she does them instinctively. Perhaps Autumn can acknowledge her privilege by being transparent in how she takes care of herself. Let more people see that she's reaping the benefits of healthy diet and exercise, and not skinny teas, juice fasts, and waist trainers. Jillian and Autumn have privilege over Tess because they are thin and can find more options for themselves when they go shopping. But does Jillian need to acknowledge her privilege? Eating right and exercising doesn't come naturally to her. She has to work at it every day. By acknowledging her privilege, it would mean that Tess should have no accountability for making the wrong decisions at every choice that her and Jillian had equal opportunity to make. Go for a walk or sit on the couch. Order the side salad or the side of fries. Fruit for dessert or cake for dessert. And with these choices, we also see the advantage, or dare I say, counter privilege on the other side. The privilege of eating the cake, the privilege of enjoying the fries, and the privilege of Netflix and chilling instead of going out to exercise. See, all the scenarios we talked about today had counter privilege. Annabelle had the privilege of a fun night out while Kira went home. Paul had the privilege of playing video games while his friends studied. Aaron had the privilege of resting while Mary was training. And Tom had the privilege of eating real ice cream while Dave had to settle for the sorbet. Now, I would like to make something crystal clear. The ease that someone has in attaining a thin body may be affected by some privileges. My socioeconomic privilege has made it easier for me to afford proper nutrition. And my genetic privilege has made me disease-free with a healthy metabolism. These things may assist in my advantage to thinness, and I acknowledge these privileges by donating to charities and social programs. But thinness on its own is not a privilege I will acknowledge. For the vast majority of people, fatness is a choice and not the result of privileges they do not hold. For example, if you are rich enough to be making TikToks about fat oppression with your iPhone 12, you likely can afford to eat healthy. And if you have time to make said TikToks, well then you also likely have enough time to do a few minutes of exercise a day. I am not telling you what to do. I am only telling you what you can do. And you can be fat if you want. But maybe you should acknowledge your choice to be fat. And while you're at it, acknowledge the benefits you had eating all that high-calorie food. So no, I won't acknowledge my thin privilege or any other earned privilege that I have. And I think doing so is harmful to the next generation. If everyone just gets things without earning them, we as a society will get lazier and more entitled than we already are. I agree with many social justice causes, and I do acknowledge privilege when we need to, but this narrative about thin privilege has gone too far. It's not a privilege, it's a choice. My choice to eat healthy and exercise has the benefit of being thin and being able to easily fit into smaller spaces. Another's choice to not eat healthy has the benefit of never feeling deprived or restricted around food. But both choices have consequences. There have been situations where I have turned down what looks to be very delicious food because I didn't think I had enough calories. And sometimes, you know what? I look back and I regret those decisions. Likewise, people that eat whatever they want without a care have the consequences that come with obesity, such as not fitting well into smaller seats and not being able to easily find clothes that fit them. There is real privilege in the world. Privilege around race, gender, socioeconomic status, and others. But when we continue to overuse the word privilege, we are diluting its meaning. But alas, this is my 25-pound yo-yo, and not earned privilege really isn't a privilege, it's just a choice. So until next time, yo-yo and let's go.